name them, but they have worked hard on this symposia, specifically Dr. Utkarsh. I would start with the academics, not delay the academics, and start with the academics and hand over the session to chairpersons for today, Dr. Sanjay Niranjan and Dr. Girish sir, to take the session forward. And I wish that all of us have happy learning and great academics for next 2 days. Thank you. Niranjan sir.
Yes, yes. So welcome all to this award-winning activity done every year by lab team. And for today's presentation, I will request Dr. Pyari Bhattacharya, past president of IAP Uttar Pradesh, to introduce the topic, and then invite Dr. Mala Kumar, who is professor and head of neonatology at KGMU. So Dr. Pyari Bhattacharya, please introduce the topic.
Thank you so much. So I will start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, yes.
So we are here today to talk about World Breastfeeding Week 2020, which ensues between 1st to 7th August every year. And this year's theme is Support Breastfeeding for a Healthier Planet. So having said that, the theme has a very different meaning from what it had in the other years. So I have put some statistics over here. In 2016, the total sale of breast milk substitutes in India was about 27 tons, and with a projected sale of 30,700 tons in 2021, which is a cumulative increase of 14%. Now, breastfeeding is climate friendly, environment friendly, everything friendly. But knowing such also, this statistic shows that we are not entirely breastfeeding, but going for breast milk substitutes. So, innumerable benefits, but sales of powdered baby milk increases day by day. Now, why are we talking about the breast milk substitutes? We need to understand that breast milk substitutes are ultra processed, generating substantial greenhouse gases at various stages, be it production, be it packaging, be it distribution. So marketing तक आते आते हम लोग इतना सारा waste and greenhouse gases produce कर चुके होते हैं just through breast milk substitutes. Not only that, इसके अलावा भी you have another waste generation in the form of bottles, teats, tin containers, promotional material which needs disposal. Now, what are the figures that the World Breastfeeding Trend Initiative show for India? When the assessment of policies and program indicators were scored, we actually found that the policies and programs revealing a glaring gap in the implementation in India. As you can see, we were just 45 out of 100 in 2018. So, what are the objectives of World Breastfeeding Week 2020? To generate awareness and action on detrimental effects of breastfeeding substitutes on the environment and the protective role of breastfeeding on the environment. To involve groups for advocacy in different states to improve protection, promotion and support of breastfeeding, especially the implementation of the IMS Act. Now, the world recognizes that the commercial promotion undermines breastfeeding. So, India enacted the Infant Milk Substitutes Feeding Bottles and Infant Food Act 1992 with slight amendments in 2003, which actually had the objective to protect breastfeeding from commercial promotions and thereby prevent malnutrition. If I give you figures, then malnutrition to the tune of 2.5 lakhs lives per year can be saved by simply implementing the IMS Act. The IMS Act controls the marketing practices of baby food manufacturers, and you will be surprised to know that in 2000, cable TV network, when it came in, they banned all TV ads of baby foods. So IMS Act actually bans any kind of promotion of infant formula, feeding bottles and infant foods for 0 to 2-year children. The caveats I have given here: if the mother is no more, if the mother is very ill, if the mother is relactating, all these are all the mother rejects the infant or the infant is dependent on artificial food. These are all temporary. Every attempt should be made that the breast milk is given to the child. So what is the role of our health professionals? The first role is to create awareness and remove and destroy all ads. To ourselves, refuse free samples, gifts, compliments if they are coming from baby food suppliers. Refuse even growth charts or those immunization cards, etc. with brand names on it. Avoid any kind of sponsorship, be it conferences, be it foreign travel, and not to give free samples or material to any mother in our hospitals or under our care. Ensure that mothers do not see formula feeds being used in your hospital itself. So when we talk about hospitals and doctors, you should have the 10 steps of successful breastfeeding by VPNI in your hospitals. Minimize any use of powdered infant formula. I've given the caveats already. Support women with face-to-face counseling on breastfeeding during pregnancy, at birth, and later till the mother and the baby are discharged. And at each contact during vaccination or follow-up, you are supposed to counsel regarding breastfeeding. Also, what can the parents do? You can recommend to the parents that they find out if the maternity facilities are okay or not. By that, you choose a facility where there is a breastfeeding friendly policy. There are staff who are trained and who know that they should be giving out consistent messages about the breastfeeding utility, and these facilities should be able to further on give support to the breastfeeding mother even after discharge. And one very important thing here is that rooming in facilities should be provided by a maternity facility. So one they can choose, and then whenever you have any problems or you want to use formula, there should be a communication between the doctor and the parent as to whether to use and what to use. And remember, there's a film called Tigers on ZEE5 web portal, which shows about the promotional behavior. We can tell the parents to go and watch these movies. Remember, the violation penalties of non-implementation or avoiding the IMS Act is imprisonment not less than 6 months to 3 years. Not only that, there is also a fine which is not less than 2,000 and up to 5,000. So the benefits somebody will be telling, one of us, but remember, human milk for human babies, cow's milk for cow's babies. One more thing that I would like to tell is about COVID-19. Now, everybody who comes, today morning I had one, they say COVID-19, should I breastfeed or shouldn't I breastfeed? So remember that COVID-19 WHO says that you must breastfeed. You can take, if you yourself are positive, you should actually take a few precautions, like you are to wear a mask, you are to wash your hands with soap and water for 40 seconds before touching the baby, and you should routinely clean and disinfect the surfaces where you are actually going to place things or place the baby or touch by your hands. So these are a few things that I was wanting to tell all of you during the introduction. The theme as it is says it all: support breastfeeding for a healthier planet. So this is something, a newborn baby has only 3 demands. They are warmth in the arms of its mother, food from her breasts, and security in the knowledge of her presence. And breastfeeding satisfies all 3 of them. तो स्तनपान एक संकल्प विकल्प कोई नहीं है इसका. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pyali, for the nice presentation. As you rightly said, it is for the better planet. So, starting from breastfeeding, one starts the equal start of life for everybody, all socioeconomic status. They are having equal start of life by breastfeeding. Secondly, they also have more productive future. And as well as IQ of the planet is increased by 5 or 10 points by exclusive breastfeeding. So with that, now I will invite Professor Mala Kumar. She is in charge of NICU, and she is also my classmate. So for keynote address, welcome Professor Mala Kumar.
Hi, thank you.
Share your screen. Yeah. Few people who are not able to see the slide presentation, Utkarsh has guided that you tap on the speaker video and then pin. Tap on the pin, and the slide will be there. Yes.
Hide this. Hide. This part will hide. Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Should we begin?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So a very good afternoon to everyone. And as part of the World Breastfeeding Week celebration 2020, I'm going to talk about human milk banking. A few facts first. For non-breastfed fed babies, the risk of dying 6 times more than for exclusively breastfed babies. 6 times more. About 42% of infants are initiated breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth in our country. Only 42%. 55% of infants are exclusively breastfed until 6 months of age. These statistics are from India, from 2015-16 data. Improving breastfeeding statistics is a fundamental driver to achieve Sustainable Development Goals for NMR of 12 per 1,000 live births by 2030. Exclusive breastfeeding has the potential to prevent 13% of under 5 mortality globally. And early initiation of breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth plus exclusive breastfeeding can reduce neonatal deaths to about a quarter. Let's look at this case now. We have a 900-gram baby born at 28 weeks of gestation, and he is hemodynamically stable at birth. How will you like to manage his nutrition on day 1? Will you like to give him parenteral nutrition? Or will you like to keep him nil orally and give him IV fluids, maybe IV 5% dextrose for 2 days or so? or will you like to begin with minimal enteral nutrition along with IV 5% dextrose? What is the one that we are going to choose? Most of us are going to choose
Third one.
the third one. Very nice. Minimal enteral nutrition with
Third one.
IV glucose 5% dextrose. So what are our major concerns when we were deciding between 1, 2 and 3? What were our major concerns for this baby? One of the concerns was growth. The other was complications regarding the preterm baby's gut, NEC, infections and neurodevelopmental outcome of this little baby who was born at 28 weeks of gestation. So these are our major concerns, and looking at these, we will be able to make a choice between parenteral nutrition and number 2 and enteral nutrition and IV fluids. If we look at the way the brain grows, then we can see when we look at these pictures, we can notice that at 28 weeks of gestation, the brain looks something like this. The MRI is looking like this. At around 38 weeks of gestation, the brain has increased about 3 times in volume. It was around 150 ml here and it's 450 ml here. The smooth surface has now become folded and complex. So the brain develops quite a bit during these 10 weeks from 28 weeks to 38 weeks. So good nutrition is going to go a long way in the neurodevelopmental outcome of such small preterm babies. So then let's say we've decided that we are going to go with minimal enteral feeds along with 5% dextrose IV. Then this feed should be made up of what? The two choices which we usually have are mother's own milk and formula. Formula may be preterm formula or term formula. This is what we really choose from. Now let us see what the recommendations of the various bodies are. The WHO, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Neonatology Forum of India. They say that the first choice should be mother's own milk. The second choice should be donor human milk. And the third choice should be formula milk, preterm or term. So now if we want to go with the second choice, donor human milk, we'll have to have a bank from where we can get the donor human milk. So in case mother's own milk is not available and we are wanting to give the baby donor human milk and not formula, we would have to have a bank where such milk can be readily available. Now, why is DHM at number 2? How does DHM compare with mother's own milk? DHM, as you might be knowing already, undergoes, mother's own milk undergoes a lot of changes. When we are keeping it in the bank, we're storing it, we're pasteurizing it, freezing it, thawing it. So a lot happens to the composition of mother's own milk. And we find that in DHM, 13% of the protein content of mother's own milk gets denatured. Some water-soluble vitamins also get degraded. All beneficial immune cells are inactivated. IgM antibodies are completely removed from DHM, from mother's milk, when DHM is made out of mother's milk. DHM is donor human milk. Targeted IgG are reduced to 66 to 70% of what is available in mother's own milk. Lactoferrin, which is such an important constitution of mother's milk, is reduced to just 20% in DHM. And the richest source of lactoferrin, we all know, is the preterm colostrum. That means colostrum coming from a mother who has delivered a preterm baby is the richest source of lactoferrin. By freezing, it gets reduced substantially. And lactoferrin is also, the content of lactoferrin is also very much reduced in mature milk coming from mothers who have delivered a full-term baby. So lactoferrin DHM is reduced. Often you'll find that mothers who are donating milk for the milk bank, they would be mothers of babies who are born at term. So their milk, composition of their milk is going to be quite different from that of a preterm mother, a mother who has delivered a preterm baby. Then the lysozyme content also in donor human milk drops by around 75% of what it was originally in mother's own milk. Fortunately, carbohydrates, fats and salts remain unchanged, fat-soluble vitamins are unchanged, and there is a reduction in the cytokines. This reduction in cytokines, it permits an expanded function of the epidermal growth factor which is present in the baby's gut in milk. And so there is a better growth of intestinal epithelial cells. Secretory immunoglobulin, IgA, which binds to microbes within the digestive tract, is 67 to 100% of its original activity in mother's milk. Pasteurization, freezing, thawing changes the characteristics of mother's own milk and the status of the donor mother, whether she has delivered a full-term baby or she has delivered a preterm baby, that's going to also affect the composition of her milk. And also when she is donating that milk. Is she donating that milk on day 1 or 2 of delivering the baby? Or is she donating milk when her own baby is 10 days old or so that she's producing mature milk? The composition is very different. Then why is DHM better than formula? We've decided that mother's milk is better than DHM, and now we want to see how DHM is better than formula. Now DHM is consistently gentler than bovine milk on the little baby's gut. In the steady state, one finds that breast milk derived factors like IgA, human milk oligosaccharides, epidermal growth factor, interleukin-10, lactoferrin, lysozyme, TGF-beta, all this is present in breast milk. These are absent in formula milk. Then the microbiota, which are there in mother's milk and in babies who are fed on mother's milk, are bifidobacteria, lactobacilli. These are protective bacteria. While in a baby's gut who's fed with formula milk, the microbiota are quite different, proteobacter enriched microbacteria. So here the barrier that these microbiota were creating and which was protective for the mucous membrane of the gut, they are not there. These good friendly bacteria are not there when the baby is fed with formula milk. So such babies are more likely to get NEC rather than babies who are fed on mother's milk. Now here there is the systematic review in the Cochrane database. Quigley et al. Have reported that they compared babies who were fed formula milk with those who were fed human milk, donor human milk. They found that though neonatal growth in weight, length and head circumference was better with formula, mortality was similar, mortality and rates of infection was similar for children who were fed with formula milk as well as those that were given DHM, but there was a substantial increase in NEC rates for babies who were given formula. They also found that there was not much difference between the long-term growth and the neurodevelopment of babies who were fed formula as compared to those who were fed DHM. Now, it is important for us to note that of the 11 RCTs that were included in the systematic review, only 4 RCTs are from the last 15 years. So, it's difficult for us to say whether there really is no difference between formula and DHM when it comes to neurodevelopment of these babies. And so more studies will be required till we can answer all these questions. But one thing is very clear, that the incidence of NEC is much, much less with DHM as compared to formula. There is one extra NEC for every 33 neonates that are fed on formula. So that makes a strong case for human milk. If it is mother's own milk, that's excellent. If it's not mother's own milk, then at least donor human milk. So the answer to this would be having a human milk bank. Let's look at the history of milk banking in the world very briefly. The first bank came about more than 100 years ago in Vienna, in Austria. Then there were milk banks all over the world. Boston was the next one, and then all sorts of breast pumps were there, and all over the world, a number of milk banks came up. Then in 1980s, many milk banks closed. This was because of the HIV scare. But again, there was a resurgence of banks in 2000s, and today there are more than 600 human milk banks globally. Brazil is the one that has maximum number of human milk banks. Let's look at what happened in India. The first milk bank came about 30 years ago. Sneha is the name of that milk bank in Lokmanya Tilak Hospital. It was established by Dr. Armida Fernandez, and it was only several years later in 2017 that this national guideline on lactation management centers, these are human milk banks are called as lactation management centers, rather than being called as banks. So it was only in 2017 that the national guidelines for these banks or lactation management centers came up. And today in India, we have more than 60 human milk banks. And we are privileged and happy and proud to say that we also have a milk bank in the medical college, the Department of Pediatrics, in the trauma center on the 4th floor. And this was inaugurated formally on the 5th of March in 2019. And it is called Dhatri Amrit Kalash. And the name was given by the previous Vice Chancellor, Professor M.L.P. Bhatt. So let's look at the levels of facility-based lactation management. At the top are the CLMCs. We have such a CLMC in our medical college, Comprehensive Lactation Management Center. So these they can come up only in medical colleges initially in phase 1, and in phase 2 they'll also open up in district hospitals, but at the moment they're only opening up in medical colleges. These medical colleges must have a NICU, which should be at least a 20-bedded NICU, and there should be at least 10,000 deliveries happening in the medical college annually for it to qualify to have a CLMC. Because the CLMC is a very expensive proposition. One spends about ₹1 crore to set up a comprehensive lactation management center. So if there are not enough beneficiaries, it's useless to have a CLMC. The next level is the lactation management unit. These lactation management units, they have already come up in district hospitals, in smaller units where the SNCUs have 12 beds or so. We have such a LMU or a satellite that is attached to the CLMC in our medical college in the Queen Mary's Hospital, which is the Department of Obstetrics and Gynae. So we have a CLMC in the trauma center in the Department of Pediatrics, and we have a LMU which is stationed in the Queen Mary's Hospital of KGMU. Then last on the rung is LSU. These are lactation support units. These can be opened up at all the 3 points in the whole of the country. So we have these 3 types of banks, not banks actually. Milk is only collected here in the CLMC. Donor milk is collected and processed only in CLMCs. LMUs, milk can be collected, but they do not have facilities for pasteurization and storage and then proper dispensation of this collected donor milk. The prerequisites for establishing a CLMC are delivery rate of more than 10,000 per year, at least a 20-bedded NICU. Then they should have provision for admitting mothers of outborn babies. There should be a full-term neonatologist or pediatrician and at least a part-time microbiologist. It should be a baby-friendly hospital, and the hospital should be providing IYCSF counseling also, and there should be adequate space. You need about 350 square meters of space for a CLMC to be set up. The personnel in a comprehensive lactation management center are a nodal officer. I am the nodal officer for the bank in our department. There should be a branch manager, a part-time microbiologist, a lab technician, and lactation counselors. Lactation counselors are the backbone of the CLMC, and hygiene helpers who take care of the hygiene of the place, clean up the lacta sets, keep everything spick and span, because infection is to be avoided at all costs in a milk bank. And what are the functions of a CLMC? We should remember that the function of a human milk bank, CLMC as it is called, is not only promoting donations and collecting and storing human milk. That's part of the functions. A very important part of the functions of a CLMC are promotion of breastfeeding, counseling mothers to breastfeed, telling them how to attach the baby to the mother during the golden hour, telling them how to position the babies properly, how to attach the baby to the breast, counseling them, teaching them how to use the breast pump, teaching them how to use the breast pump to collect milk for babies who cannot suck directly at the mother's breast. So here's the counseling session also that's going on. Then, so early initiation of breastfeeding, breastfeeding technique, advantages of breast milk, all these things have to be told to the mothers. All this work is done by the lactation counselors. And KMC. KMC cannot be separated from the idea of exclusive breastfeeding. And of course, promote milk donation, safe collection of milk, safe processing, safe storage, and finally dispensing of DHM to babies who are in need. What is the structure of a CLMC? This is our CLMC. Here's the reception area where mothers can be seated. Here's the counseling area, which has a TV. The video goes on and on here, counseling them about different aspects of breastfeeding. Then there is a milk expression area with very good quality medical breast pumps, cleaning area with the dishwasher. All the lacta sets and the bottles are being kept here in which donor milk is collected. Then a very important area, area, which is a sterile area, which has a laminar flow you can see in the background, and it also has a pasteurizer. And we have a storage area, which is a deep freezer. Here you can see many racks here. All of these are different racks of a deep freezer in which donor milk is collected and stored. The equipment which one needs in a CLMC are a pasteurizer, laminar airflow, deep freezer, breast pumps, barcode machine, hot air oven. This hot air oven is used for sterilizing equipment, a dishwasher, an RO plant, IEC material, and sometimes you can even have a milk analyzer, which will be able to tell you what is the composition of the milk that you are collecting. We currently don't have a milk analyzer in our bank. So the processes in a CLMC are 6. Number 1 is screening of donor mothers, then collection of milk from these mothers, then processing of this DHM, that is pasteurization, then testing of this donor milk after pasteurization to see whether it is contaminated or it is sterile. After that, proper storage of pasteurized DHM, and then finally dispensation of DHM. So here these people, the lactation counselors, they are motivating the mothers. Then after you motivated them for donation, then there is a checklist, whether the mother has a VDRL which is negative, she should be HIV negative, HPSAG negative, she should not be having she should not be a case of active tuberculosis, she should be a non-smoker, a non-alcoholic, she should not be on any anti-cancer drugs. And finally, we must have a written consent from the donor mother that yes, you can use my milk for other babies. Some religions don't allow sharing of milk, so we have to be very careful about this consent of the donor mother. There are certain things which can temporarily disqualify a donor. If she has an acute infection, if there is reactivation of a chronic illness which is requiring medication, maybe arthritis, cough for more than 2 weeks, this would be suspect TB maybe, mastitis, herpes zoster on the thorax, vaccination for rubella, measles, mumps within the past 1 month, or varicella vaccine within the last 3 months. So temporarily this mother will not be able to donate milk. Then following rubella or chickenpox in the household in the past 1 month. So these are temporary disqualifications for donation of milk. Then here you can see that there is a breast pump. Mothers are busy collecting milk. This milk is collected in bottles. These are all sterile bottles. These are labeled properly from which area these mothers are collecting milk, so that if there is any contamination, we can trace that which area they were not maintaining asepsis properly. And then this milk is carried in ice box by the hygiene helpers. This is happening in the Queen Mary's Hospital. So they cross the road with the bottles of milk in the ice box and they come to the CLMC. In the CLMC in trauma center, these bottles of milk will be kept here in specially labeled sections of the deep freezer. You can read here raw milk from NICU, raw milk from Queen Mary's. So this is raw milk, and then after it is pasteurized, they will keep these in bottles, and this is reading ready to consume. Okay, so they have to be very careful about this. There cannot be any mixing between the two. So then what do? We've collected this milk and it is kept, these bottles are kept in the deep freezer. This is the technician. One fine day, he finds that he has enough milk so that he can set the milk for pasteurization. So he thaws this milk and he puts it all into a conical flask. This is cooling of milk. This cooled milk, he draws one sample in a test tube. All this is happening in the laminar flow. He is doing all this in the laminar flow. And from this cooled milk, a sample is taken and this goes to the microbiology lab and on this. So there should be less than 10 to the power of 5 colony forming units of bacteria in this, because if it's more than this, then we will have to discard this milk. So this is for Enterobacteriaceae, and for Staph aureus, the CFUs should not be more than 10 to the power of 4. We have to be careful about this. Then this milk is put into these bottles here once into the pasteurizer. Once the culture report says that the colony forming units in these bottles of milk were less than 10 to the power of 5, and then by this Holder pasteurization, we pasteurize this human milk. Holder pasteurization is a method which is also known as the low temperature, long time method. Low temperature because we're going to heat up the milk only to 62.5 degrees centigrade, and long time means you're going to heat it for 30 minutes. And after this milk is suddenly cooled to 25 degrees. So this gives a thermal shock to the bacteria. So if there are any bacteria, whatever bacteria is remaining there, they will be dead by this thermal shock. And this Holder pasteurization is the best one to use. It's the best compromise between microbiological safety and immunological compromise, the Holder pasteurization. So now post-pasteurization, these bottles have been taken out from the pasteurizer, and now from each bottle, a sample is taken into these test tubes in the laminar flow, and all these samples sent to the lab. And now this would not grow any bacteria. If this doesn't grow any bacteria, meanwhile they'll put this back into the deep freezer when the reports will come in that yes, these bottles have no bacteria, they are growing none, then this milk can be dispensed for consumption. So here we have the deep freezer, which has now got milk which is pasteurized and it is frozen here. Now here there is a little baby in the NICU and his mother is dead, let's say, and he doesn't have any milk. So then what can we do? The doctor there in the NICU will write a prescription. And before writing the prescription, he will talk to the parents of this baby that are you okay with accepting donor human milk? Because some people don't like to use donor human milk because of religious beliefs. If they give a consent, then he writes a prescription. That prescription goes to the bank, and here this lady, she's taking out the milk from the freezer, and that milk in whichever quantity that is asked for. The doctor will say he needs, let's say, 100 ml of milk for 2 or 3 babies in the NICU. So she will give out 1 bottle, and that will go to the NICU. It will stay in the fridge there. When the sisters need to feed the baby, that milk will be thawed, it will be brought to room temperature, and then it will be given to the baby. So that is how what all goes on in a human milk bank. And this is just one of our little stories. There is this little 1200 grammer who was born in Queen Mary's Hospital. He was in the NICU, and his mother was back there in Queen Mary's Hospital. He was born by cesarean section, and she was not producing even a drop of milk. So the lactation counselor, they made a little video on their smartphone, the baby's video, and they showed the mother that video, and that encouraged her to lactate. So then 5 ml of milk or even 4 ml of milk that was expressed from the mother, and it was brought for this little baby in the NICU. If mother's own milk is being used, then you don't need to pasteurize it. That milk will be given to the baby as it is. So there are a few hiccups when you're running a human milk bank. Sometimes the equipment fail. Our pasteurizer was not working for some time. Sometimes the personnel, especially the lactation counselors, they leave. Then the newspaper is always after you to put in some news about you, which is often misleading. जांच के इंतजाम के बिना freeze पड़ा milk bank, this was for our milk bank, and things like this keep coming. The good thing is that there have been no episodes of infection in our bank yet. One big hiccup is this COVID that has come up. Coronavirus has really been a jolt for the milk bank because there are not so many donors anymore. People don't want to accept other mothers' milk for their babies. So there is a temporary hiccup, but we are trying to overcome that. So these are the performance indicators. The number of live births ever since the milk bank came into place were around 7,700. The mothers who were counseled regarding lactation were about 6,500. Mothers who expressed breast milk because of the presence of these lactation counselors within the first 24 hours of giving birth to the baby were 85%. Early initiation of breastfeeding happened in 81% of the babies. And the total donor human milk which has been collected up till now is around 125 liters, and donor milk which has been dispensed is around 100 liters. Babies who got DHM are 260. Since we don't have so much of DHM at hand, we restrict using DHM for babies who are less than 1200 grams only as of now. As we start having more donors, we will be able to use milk for other babies also. So during this period, after the milk bank, neonates receiving exclusive human milk at discharge are around 65% in our hospital. And KMC beneficiaries are to the tune of 98% of all eligible babies. So the way forward is aggressive lactation counseling from antenatal period. Our lactation counselors are usually meeting the mothers for the first time when they come to deliver the baby. That's not enough. We are realizing that this will have to begin in the ANC OPDs itself. Then we have to enhance early initiation of breastfeeding in babies born by cesarean section. This has increased to a great length, and almost 80% of the babies who are born by cesarean section are also put onto the mother's breast on the operation table itself in the labor room. Then we want to organize milk donation camps so that we have a bigger pool of milk coming in. And we'll be then collecting milk from mothers who are not our beneficiaries. You know, people may in the future. And then supply donor human milk to neonates in other facilities and even for babies who are at home. These are some of our donor champs you can see here. They are wearing crowns because they really donated milk like anything. So remember that mother's own milk is the best. So try to feed the babies their own mother's milk. And if you don't have that, then donor your milk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malakumar. This is a new asset in the armamentarium for saving the newborns. At the same time, you had explained all the complexities of ethical issues, religious issues, legal issues, and also the consent issues of donating and accepting. So it is far from simple. So congratulations for having the first human donor milk bank for the state. And yeah, yes, and this is also maybe before that kangaroo mother care and direct mother's own milk is the low cost intervention.
Yes.
So this can be a costly one, but I will invite our next speaker, Dr. Utkar Banshal, for explaining the other low cost interventions
Thank you so much.
for the survival of the neonate. Thank you, Dr. Mala.
Ma'am, you are still sharing the screen.
Yes, Utkar, you are in.
Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Questions we will take after the end of the session, first session.
So I would like to thank all the seniors and all the dear colleagues who are present in this symposium. My topic is low-cost interventions to reduce the neonatal mortality. Now, if you look at the burden of perinatal health in India, 19% of the world's births occur in India, and that is a staggering 27 billion per year. Neonatal mortality rate of India is 28 per 1,000 live births, while the infant mortality rate is 41. And the neonatal mortality contributes to about 60% of the infant mortality. If you look at the causes of neonatal mortality, preterm births, complication during births, and the neonatal infections are the most important complications. So if we talk about reducing the burden of diseases, you look at our NICUs, which seem to be very costly affairs for most of the people, and most of the people cannot afford it. But there are few cost-effective interventions that can improve the outcomes. Antenatally, we can use steroids and magnesium sulfate. During the time of birth, deferred cord clamping, resuscitation with regulated oxygen. In the NICU, we can give proper oxygen and temperature control can be done. Then the kangaroo mother care, non-invasive ventilation, breastfeeding, early and adequate feeding, hand washing, and the antibiotic usage. So let's look at them one after the other. First is antenatal corticosteroids. In a meta-analysis of 26 trials using 2 doses of betamethasone with a 24-hour gap or 4 doses of dexamethasone, seen that RDS reduced to about 50%. Need of respiratory support and an ICU decreased. IVH was decreased by 40% and necrotizing enterocolitis decreased by 50%. All of this led to a decreased neonatal deaths. So, standard of care for women at risk of preterm births before 32 weeks of gestational age should be there with antenatal corticosteroids. India is having more than 60% coverage, but there is still room for improvement. It should be more than 90%. I must say that barring emergency cesarean sections or precipitous labor, almost every preterm labor delivery should be a candidate of treatment. Even the WHO and UN have put a joint statement. It is estimated that up to 4 lakh lives could be saved each year by a single intervention, and that is giving antenatal corticosteroids in the low resource setting. Coming to magnesium sulfate, it is given to women at risk of preterm birth for the neuroprotection of the fetus. In a meta-analysis of 5 trials involving about 6,000 agree the risk of cerebral palsy, so long-term neuroprotection for the child's life is so important. So if you treat 56 mothers less than 34 weeks of gestation age, you will be able to save one baby. And if you are treating less than 30 weeks gestation age, you will save one baby in 46 months. Magnesium sulfate helps the CNS of the fetus by several mechanisms. It regulates the excitatory stimuli by blocking the NMDA receptors, have anti-apoptotic effects. The Australians are using it, and their guidelines say that they will use in all who are less than 30 weeks of gestation age, where the birth is planned or expected within 24 hours. Now, they will get it regardless of the parity of the mother, the plurality, whether there is a singleton or there are multiple babies, the mode of delivery, maybe a cesarean or a normal delivery. Antenatal steroids are given or not given, whatever be the reason of preterm delivery, they are giving it because it is for the baby. Dose is intravenous for heart rate, blood pressure, and the patellar reflex of the mother. Now, coming to the clamping of the cord. Traditionally, what happened, as soon as the baby was born, the obstetrician would clamp the cord, hand the baby over to the pediatrician, and immediately get on with the task of delivering the placenta. This active management of the third state was done mainly to reduce the postpartum hemorrhage. But it was realized that 70% of the blood available for placenta to fetal transfusion was wasted. So the recommendation came to defer the cord clamping. Now, how long you will like to defer it? It should be done for at least 1 minute. It can be anywhere between 1 to 3 minutes. In a study of 454 preterms, and where it was seen that delayed cord clamping or immediate cord clamping was done, it was seen that hematocrit were increased in the babies with deferred cord clamping, transfusion requirements were decreased, intraventricular hemorrhage also came down because the babies didn't have to face a sudden hypo or hypertension because of the low volume of blood. Also, because of the immunological factors transmitted to the blood, the late onset sepsis also decreased. So this deferred cord clamping should be a modality which we should use in every day. Oxygen. Now again, a meta-analysis of 5 trials in about 1,300 newborn infants, it showed that by resuscitating with 100% oxygen, the first breath and cry of the newborn is delayed. Initially, we used to give oxygen to all babies who we were resuscitating. And it was based on the principle that if some of the oxygen is good, 100% will be very good for babies. But this trial also showed that the infants who had received 100% oxygen, even for a few minutes, had a basic principle of resuscitation, which says that opening up of the alveoli is more important than the concentration of oxygen. So the NRP guidelines changed, is that then 100% oxygen should be 100% oxygen in chest conditions. Now there is a problem that oxygen blender is not available with every place, especially so in the delivery room. So what can be done? So this is a study which said that self-inflating bags with a reservoir in situ can deliver a variety of oxygen concentrations even without a blender. So you can deliver 40% oxygen concentration with. Also, we should try 94% in the NICUs also, because it has studied in various trials that both hypoxia and hyperoxia are hypothermically admitted to the NICU. Temperature is independently associated with high mortality, and hypothermic babies have a 1.6 to 1.9 times probability of dying. A simple plastic bag can prevent evaporation and heat loss in the preterms. So we should try to use more of it and try to prevent hypothermia. Kangaroo mother care. It's such an effective intervention. It reduces mortality by 30 to 40%, infections by 50%, hypothermia by 72%. So it improves the length. It also increases the exclusive breastfeeding rates if they are studied up to 3 months. Now, ventilation had been a very important strategy to save the sick babies in the NICUs, and conventional ventilation had been a mainstay of treatment. But now, non-invasive ventilation has been coming up, where we can use CPAP, HHFNC, which are cheaper than the conventional ventilation, and also they are very effective. Non-invasive ventilation also offers us the reduced complications of the conventional ventilation, like the ventilator-associated pneumonias and the ventilator-induced lung injuries, like the barotrauma, polytrauma, electrotrauma, biotrauma, and oxytrauma. The important benefit that can use CPAP. This CPAP can reduce the usage of surfactant in the preterm babies, and this will again bring down the cost for the parents. Eighth is the human milk. The human milk, what I can say, it is the foundation of life. From the many benefits of human milk you will hear, I will keep on few the incidence of sepsis. So it studied that the babies who are fed on human milk as compared to the formula milk, the babies had about 50% less in chances of infection in the early days of life, and in the later days of life, the infection was even nil. We think of necrotizing enterocolitis. Using breast milk is very, very important for the preterm babies. The babies who are fed on only human milk, the mortality rate due to NEC was decreased from 51 to 26%, whereas the babies who received partial breast milk, the mortality was 3 times higher in the study. And the formula-fed babies had a very high mortality, about 6 to 10 times higher. So the breast milk is so much so protective from infections, NEC, and many other nutritive benefits, as well as the benefit to the growing tail. Milk from the breast milk bank is always better than a human form, always better than a formula. And we have a luxury of having a human milk bank in our city. We have just heard about it. Volume of feeding should be built up early and aggressively. You should not shy up and use more of other than milk. You should try to build up the volume. Sir, am I not audible?
कहीं कहीं पर कम हो जा रहा है उत्कर्ष आवाज, थोड़ा सा पास ले लो माइक्रोफोन.
कुछ नेटवर्क की इशू है उत्कर्ष, इस वजह से प्रॉब्लम आ रही है. ऑडियो गायब हो जाता है.
Okay.
उत्कर्ष अपना वीडियो ऑफ कर दो, खाली प्रेजेंटेशन रखो.
अभी वॉइस कैसी है बॉस?
करो भैया, करो.
वॉइस थोड़ा सा कट के आ रही है. अपना वीडियो ऑफ कर दो, तो उससे नेटवर्क इशू होगा तो रिजॉल्व कर जाएगा.
Now?
Okay.
Okay.
Better.
So trophic feeds should be used. Hand washing. Hand washing is the most important intervention which we can use for decreasing infection in the NICUs. And this is a very important time. In this COVID time, we can increase the rate of hand washing not only from our staff but also from the general public. A study was done by Agarwal et al., which used the interventions of hand washing, aseptic precautions, enteral nutrition, strict antibiotic policy, nurses training, and involvement of the mother. And with these simple interventions, they were able to decrease the neonatal mortality from 29.3 to 20.3 per thousand. And they were able to decrease the sepsis-related births to almost half. Antibiotic usage was decreased to almost 1/3. And newer antibiotic use came down about 15 times. Lastly, I will talk about the antibiotics in about 15,000 newborns who required an ICU admission. In the Dennis study, it shows that the incidence of total and culture positive sepsis was 14.3 and 6.2 respectively. So there is a drastic increase in number of multi-drug resistant bugs in the newborn nursery and intensive care units. We have to use antibiotics rationally. Every unit should have a proper antibiotic policy. An antibiogram of the unit should be showing what bugs are there in the local environment. We should try to use stepwise approach for antibiotics. We should not use broad spectrum antibiotics like that. We should try to stop antibiotics if there is no evidence of infection. And the antibiotic stewardship program should always be there in place. I would end with this slide in which I would like to show you that out of the 114 people who are visiting this symposium, everyone has pledged to protect, support, and promote breastfeeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Utkarsh. We pledge to promote and support breastfeeding, every one of us. Very nice presentation. So, as you mentioned, COVID. You are seeing, we all are seeing that everybody is waiting for the costly vaccine, but the low-cost interventions are not implemented. So we should respect the low-cost intervention of kangaroo mother care and other things which are known, they can make a lot of difference. Now, mother's feeding. The most important reason for not exclusively breastfeeding or initiating feeding is said to be by mothers, दूध नहीं होता है. So I will invite Dr. Akanksha Verma from IGPEI on galactogogues. So as I know, best galactogog is the baby sucking at the breast. Any other galactogogues and the presentation on galactogogues, Dr. Akanksha Verma, please share your screen. In the meantime, the chat box is flooded with congratulations, Dr. Mala Kumar. She had been answering questions also on that. Dr. Akanksha Verma.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
We are also joined by Girish, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Girish, sir. Sir, this is your chance. Please, sir, please introduce your student and take over the session, sir. We were waiting for you.
And then you are doing a great job. Please continue. All right. It's an honor to be there on the LFA platform, and something which is very, very important is the breast milk. And just as we mentioned that most of the time we struggle in giving breast milk, so we thought that maybe we will touch a little more how to facilitate breast milk when the mother faces problem that she is not having adequate breast milk. And for this, Dr. Akanksha Verma would be speaking on. She is our exam-going PDCC senior resident. Over to Dr. Akanksha, please.
Thank you, sir. So a very good afternoon to all. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers and my department for letting me this, giving me this platform to, for sharing it with such esteemed speakers. So we would, next few minutes, we would be talking about galactogogues. So before beginning, we should know something about the neurohormonal control of lactation. So as we all know, that as the baby suckles at the breast, the sensory impulses are passed from nipple to the brain, and in response, the hypothalamus leads to release of prolactin from the anterior pituitary and oxytocin from the posterior pituitary. So these two are the major hormones that are involved directly in and affect the breastfeeding. Apart from that, some other like estrogen are also indirectly involved. So prolactin is the major hormone which leads to stimulation of the milk production in the alveoli. At the same time, I would like to mention that this prolactin, it basically functions in a negative feedback system in which dopamine serves as an inhibitor of this. This knowledge would help us understand the pharmacology of the galactogogues, which we will be discussing later. So to begin with, galactogogues are basically substances that are used for the induction, maintenance and augmentation of the breast milk supply in the mothers. Because there can be some scenarios like maternal and neonatal infant illness, or wherein the mother and the babies have been separated, like we often encounter in case of preterm babies or other sick babies who have been hospitalized in NICU. Also, galactogogues may be have been indicated in adoptive breastfeeding, where a woman is induced for lactation where she was not pregnant, or in cases of relactation. So whenever we are dealing with a mother who has lactation difficulties, to begin with, non-pharmacological measures is the first step to be dealt with, because these are the most important. If we take care of these measures, probably we might not able to go on to the pharmacological agents. Although much has been emphasized in earlier talks, but then again I would like to emphasize on lactation counseling or extensive education of the pregnant and the lactating mother, demonstrating her how to lactate properly, the positioning, the latching, and the length of the feeding. Skin to skin contact or kangaroo mother care is, as we all know, apart from all the other benefits, it provides, it facilitates lactation and improves the milk production in the mother. Stress contributes to decreased milk production by decreasing oxytocin relief. So our measures should focus on all that we can do to alleviate the stress in the mother, be it some fear or some painful stimulus like the mother is having some mastitis or some painful conditions of the breast or anywhere else. Any cultural practices that are leading, that are not letting her breastfeed openly, like so embarrassment or privacy, these need to be taken care of. Then apart from that, a mother who's well hydrated is going to lactate well. So after all, breast milk is what? The most of it is water. So adequate fluids, plenty of fluids, be it milk itself is a galactogogue. So a lactating mother should be advised to have milk repetitively. Apart from that, juices, soups, and all water. So she should be well hydrated. And to make the sessions more enjoyable, maybe we can tell her some deep breathing, some relaxation and massaging of the breast, as well as some enjoyable music, which so that the mother and baby both can enjoy their breastfeeding sessions. Apart from that, apart from this control by the prolactin, the rate of milk synthesis is on the local level is in the mammary gland is controlled by the autocrine control. So it is the supply and demand phenomena. If the breasts are not drained regularly and thoroughly, the milk production is going to decline. So more frequent feeding, if not possible to feed, then expression of milk or pumping of milk is recommended to keep the milk secretion high. But even after all these, if we are not able to improve the milk supply in the mothers, then the pharmacological agents or galactogogues are where they step in. Now these agents, they can either be synthetic products or some plant products like some herbal products, some traditional foods and beverages, which we are going to discuss. So starting with the synthetic agents, as we said earlier, saw in earlier slide, that dopamine serves as an inhibitor of prolactin. So if we want to increase the prolactin levels, what we aim at are using the dopamine antagonist. So there have been various category of drugs that act as dopamine antagonists and hence lead to increase in the serum prolactin levels. So basically they act on the lactotropic cells of the anterior pituitary and by various mechanisms induce the expression of the prolactin gene. The two most extensively studied agents in this category are domperidone and metoclopramide. Of these also, domperidone seems to be the most promising agent because it is devoid of the neuropsychiatric side effects that metoclopramide has that we all are aware of. And there have been various trials wherein it has been shown that there is an increase in the mean milk production after use of domperidone for various days. And trials starting way back from 1985 have told us that. So it has to be taken in doses of 10 milligrams every 6 hourly. Apart from that, some oxytocin, which helps by contraction of the myoepithelial cells and facilitates the letdown reflex, can be used as, it is available as nasal sprays, which can be used as a spray before the feeding. Other miscellaneous agent could be metformin, which is related to one of its precursor, Galligan, which has been shown to improve the feeding. There are some other agents like recombinant bovine, somatomamotropin, TRH, and medroxyprogesterone, which are still under trials, but there are no clear recommendations for using them at present. Now, moving on to the herbal products, which if in fact India has been, there have been some traditional foods which have been used since centuries in India. Like we all are aware of the fenugreek, the or the methi, fennel, or the saunf, shatavari, or the choti saunf. These are the products which are available in every Indian kitchen. So they have been extensively studied and they are shown that they act. They have some active ingredients like phytoestrogens, which act on the lactotropic cells of the anterior pituitary and the mammary epithelial cells of the breast, and ultimately lead to induction of prolactin gene expression and the cell proliferations. So, and in fact, those listed in this table, these are certain substances which have been studied in the literature as well, though there is still a limited evidence to suggest and recommend their use, but still we know that they have been used for centuries in India and there have been no harmful effects that has been attributed to them, so why not to use them? Fenugreek, apart from phytoestrogen, increases the sweat production in breast, as we all know is a modified sweat gland. Shatavari or asparagus contains steroidal saponins. Apart from the cumin or jeera, that also contains thiamine, which increases milk production, and it is a rich source of calcium and iron as well. Apart from that, there is a long list of the foods that have been using since centuries, including the ajwain, the tel, the laddu of tel, gond laddu, sont ke laddu. All of these have been extensively used. And there is enough literature to support that they have been an improvement in the milk expression with these agents. So to sum up, there should be a stepwise approach to lactation difficulties, starting from the non-pharmacological measures, making it the sessions enjoyable for the mother and baby, and then moving on to the pharmacological resorts. And there are a platter of foods which are available to us to offer to the mother, so we can use any of them as per our discretion. Thank you very much. Thank you, LAP, my department, and all the newborns. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Akanksha, for giving insight on the galactogogues. Now, a few things we have to understand, and that is that there is some disturbance coming. Okay, so am I audible? Am I audible? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Few things we have to understand, and that is that lactation is a psychosomatic process, and hence we have to address both to psyche as well as to soma, and therefore we have to counsel mother very strongly that don't worry, you will lactate, and few statements must come to ensure her, to put her on positivity, and they are, which we practice in our daily routine. Firstly, to make a statement to give confidence to her by saying that, see, when during pregnancy, your uterus could give milk to the fetus. He could grow from one cell to the full newborn. So uterus, milk, uterus, blood, and fetus growth. All is happening naturally. Likewise, after birth, the breasts are supposed to do the same job. Breast, mammary glands, milk, and the newborn growth. Same nature. Now it is only in human beings that we start saying, oh, aapko to doodh kam aata hai. What happens to the rest of the mammalian world? All animals, be it a small calf elephant or a small baby tiger, they attain their adult size. And hence, once adult animal can attain the adult size, why not human baby will attain his growth? It happens because the mother is not prepared well. She has information from the peer, and we inadequately address this, and hence there is always a problem that, oh, mother is not producing enough. And this especially happens when this mother happens to be a little bit more literate, or in most cases, I find it difficult with doctor mothers. They are especially very anxious, and hence there is a need to have a counseling right from the pregnancy and later on, so that this anxiety level is less. The second factor or statement which we give, always to promote mother or to bring motivation in the mother, acting as a galactagogue to make a statement. And that is that all milk are having specific growth promoting factor, including a brain growth promoting factor. After making that statement, then we ask, okay, now you tell me, would you like your baby to have a human brain or your choice? You can have a buffalo's brain, cow's brain, goat's brain, and we give her a choice. After listening that statement, the mother says, let what may happen, I shall give my human milk only, I'll try my best. So first 2 points at a psychological level that we must prepare her very, very strongly. The other points which we must remember is that emptying breast is most important. Now, if we do not empty the breast, the lactation would not take place adequately. And this especially happens when the baby comes to NICU for care. Now, there is a separation, and the baby is without mother's milk, and mother is not giving milk for a couple of days, and hence she becomes dry. And therefore, it is duty of the newborn care provider that continuously mother must keep on expressing the milk every 2 hours as if the baby was with her, so that she doesn't become dry and baby gets mother's milk at the earliest whenever we feel it is appropriate. Then issue is drugs. Drugs should be hardly used. They should be used when other things have failed. And I am yet to find that if the neonatologist is totally committed, acts as a lactation consultant, most of the time he would succeed. Maybe the drugs would be using more of as a placebo, at times they may function. And whatever are traditional practices, now some science is coming up to prove that, but we should not negate them. We should certainly use them until they have a side effect, then it's fine that you may avoid them. But all Indian traditional practices which are used for centuries, it is good to practice them, and maybe they'll do some good. So with these few remarks on galactagogues, I would request the next speaker is Dr. Arun Gautam, and would be talking on something which is at the moment very, very important. And since the COVID pandemic is on, and then there are doubts about breastfeeding in COVID scenario, so we thought that we will talk to you something about breast milk in COVID scenario, which would be both from the practice point of view, and also we would like to say that it is not just a practice point of view, it has got something else to offer, which world has started looking at the breast milk as a part of treatment to COVID. So with these few introductory words, I request Dr. Arun Gautam to come. He is my, again, senior resident whose exam going in PGCC. Over to Dr. Arun, please. Hello. Dr. Arun, are you there?
Yes, sir, he's trying to connect.
Okay, fine. All right.
So this is the last session, sir, 10 minutes.
We will try to finish in lesser than 10 minutes.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks to HOD sir and the organizing committee to allow me this opportunity. As sir already described the importance of this topic in the present scenario, we are dealing with a once in a lifetime event, COVID-19 pandemic in the present area. So what is the difference and what is the special situation for the breastfeeding and the breast milk in relation to the COVID-19? This is the topic we are going to discuss, and some debatable topics, because all the scenarios, all the guidelines and all the recommendations are still on a basis of risk benefit ratio. They are not in a exact position to say anything. So first of all, as of breastfeeding, we already discussed the multiple benefits and their importance in our previous talks. But I would like to add one thing, that the timeline of breastfeeding, the antenatal preparation is the utmost thing in our breastfeeding in form of antenatal maternal nutrition and the family counseling, especially the family counseling, not only of the mother, along with the especially mother-in-law or mother, the elderly female with the mother, in form of videos and session in the antenatal part. And this is the part that I think most of our pediatricians and radiologists lack, because the mother in the antenatal period not come directly to our side. So this is the part we can do in the antenatal period. Likewise, the psychological sessions we are doing. Along with that, the role of maternal diet in the form of preparedness for the antenatal period and as well as for the postnatal period, in form of adequate calories to the mother, good fat in form of omega-3 and omega-6 that leads to the better neurodevelopment outcome in the baby, quality protein that leads to the better immunoprotective factors in the breast milk, and the supplemental minerals to promote the weight and the proper growth of the baby. This is a important part that is to be deal antenatal as well as in the postnatal period. So what's the difference of the breast milk and breastfeeding in relation to the COVID-19? So as far as we see, the breastfeeding is important in every condition. It is a source of the everything for the nutrition, for the antimicrobial factors, for the cytokines and inflammatory factors. This is the basic benefits of the breastfeeding, along with the other subsidiary benefits like temperature maintains, good attachment, neurodevelopmental outcomes. So the difference in COVID-19 in relation to the COVID-19, so breast milk can be a source of the mother can transmit the virus to the baby, can be a source of the infection as far as considered as a vertical transmission. And the second thing is that the breast milk is also a source of protective antibody. As we can see, it's a basic physiology and reaction of the mother's body, that if she developed an infection, she developed antibody, and that antibodies are present in the most of the time for the various infections present in the maternal milk. So it is possibly our theory that these antibodies, predominantly the secretory IgA, must be present in the breast milk. Till now, there is a limited literature and articles in support of this. Multiple case reports and a small case series shows that COVID-19 viral RNA is present in breast milk, but the infectivity capacity of this virus is still debatable till now. As far as concerning the presence of antibodies in the breast milk, this is presently a hot topic, and some case series and case report are able to isolate antibodies specific to anti-SARS-CoV-2 in milk. But this is the thing that they are the limitation of the sample size and the limitation of structure. So the secretion of these antibodies and these virus, according to the timeline or the postnatal age, is not available. Like what is the amount of the virus or antibodies on the day 1 or on the day 10